We may soon have better coffee through chemistry. Researchers have identified the key chemicals that can sometimes turn a sublime cup of joe into a bitter experience. The researchers announced their grounds-breaking findings August 21st at the National Meeting of the American Chemical Society in Boston. Studies over the last few years have found some 30 compounds that contribute to coffee bitterness. Said study leader Thomas Hoffman, everybody thinks that caffeine is the main bitter compound in coffee, but that's definitely not the case. In fact, he thinks only about 15% of coffee's bite is caffeine-based. Using the analytical tool chromatography, along with taste testing, the scientists determined that bitterness is due to two main types of compounds that form during roasting. These are chlorogenic acid lactones, the major bitterness contributors in light to medium roasts, and phenylindanes, which the lactones turn into upon further cooking, and which account for most of the bitterness in dark roasts. So perhaps in the future you'll be ordering a grande half-calf dephenylindanated caramel mochaccino.
My grandmother was always a bit of a chatty Cathy, that is, until she was a passenger in a car. Then she'd fall silent. Her reason? Driving a car is difficult work and requires concentration. Or so my grandfather told her. Turns out he had a point. Drivers with passengers are 60% more likely to have a car accident that results in hospitalization. That's according to research from the George Institute for International Health. But as much as passengers distract drivers, nothing beats mobile phones for increasing the risk of crashing. The Institute analyzed nearly 500 serious accidents and found that the use of a cell phone, even hands-free, increased the likelihood of accidents by 4 times. While researchers haven't figured out exactly how car conversations impair driving, the effects contribute to the 40,000 automobile deaths in the U.S. annually. That's about the size of Fenway Park. So with new cars being souped up with TVs, internet access, and more cup holders than you can imagine, there's a Disneyland of distraction inside. Maybe it's time to unplug and focus our eyes and ears on the road ahead.
In the insect world, bright reds, oranges, and yellows can be a warning. Eat me at your own risk, pal. Because colorful bugs can be toxic. They often get their chemical protection from nibbling poisonous plants, but these poisons can have a flip side for us. Some fight cancer or tropical parasites that cause diseases like malaria. The idea that colorful bugs can tip us off to disease-fighting plants isn't new. But researchers at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute just backed it up with science in the journal Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment. They chose 10 plant species that kill parasites and cancer in lab tests, and 10 species that look similar but do nothing. Then they headed into the Panamanian jungle to survey hundreds of these plants for beetles and caterpillars. Turns out they found colorful bugs on almost all the toxic plants, but less than half of the harmless plants. And black, brown, and gray bugs didn't have a preference. They ate indiscriminately. So modern-day shamans scouring the jungle for cancer-fighting drugs might just cut down on search time by keeping an eye out for brightly colored bugs.
Have you ever had a nightmare about taking a math test? Math anxiety is so common that researchers use it to study how stress affects performance. At last week's AAAS meeting in San Francisco, a panel discussed math anxiety. One researcher said her study showed that the best students are the ones most likely to choke under a high-pressure test situation. That's because normally they use their higher memory capacity to methodically work through a problem. But when the pressure's on, the good students resort to the same ineffective shortcuts the poor students use all the time. Another researcher shed some light on this, with his study showing that anxiety actually occupies working memory, wasting it instead of devoting it to the task at hand. And just being able to suppress these emotions doesn't seem to help. In fact, people with higher intelligence actually consumed more resources to keep their anxiety in check. They say their findings suggest that high-pressure tests might not be measuring what they're meant to, and schools might want to try de-emphasizing their importance.
Understanding all the genes and molecules involved in human disease is quite a challenge. That's why scientists study model organisms, like flies and worms and mice, that are made of the same stuff we are. Now scientists in Illinois and Israel have found a strange new model that they say mimics the molecular behavior of human cancers, the naked mole rat. These odd little creatures live in subterranean tunnels where air is at a premium, so the animals have evolved a strategy for surviving when oxygen is scarce. Well, the same is true of cancers. In a rapidly growing tumor, the cells in the center are often oxygen deprived because blood vessels don't reach all the way inside. And the scientists are finding that mole rats and tumor cells use similar mechanisms to make the most of the little oxygen they have. In particular, the researchers have so far identified 3 genes that respond to plummeting oxygen levels. The genes' activity patterns are the same in mole rats and in cancer cells. Understanding how these genes work could suggest new ways of choking the life out of tumors by turning off their ability to live like mole rats. Well, malignant mole rats. This January, the country Turkey will join a handful of European nations that require visual health warnings on every pack of cigarettes. These images include things like diseased lungs and a foot sporting a toe tag. But maybe a petri dish overrun with bacteria should make the list, because a new study shows that cigarettes are contaminated with a bevy of nasty bugs, including some that cause disease. The report will appear in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives. Burning and inhaling that heady mix of tar and nicotine, not to mention the benzene and other chemicals in tobacco smoke, can promote lung cancer and emphysema, and now it seems that cigarettes could also deliver a dose of respiratory infection. Scientists use what are called gene chips to identify the microbes present in 4 different brands of smokes, and the list they found reads like a syllabus for Microbiology 101. It includes Acinetobacter, Clostridium, Klebsiella, and Pseudomonas aeruginosa, all of which can make people sick. The researchers think some bugs can probably survive in the smoke. So carcinogenic, and now with bacterial pathogens.
Genesis Church of the Most Holy Redeemer has held a musical celebration every year since its construction in 1592. And recently, the church has inspired debate among historians. How could its echoing chambers clearly portray the complicated music performed during the festival? A New York University doctoral student named Braxton Boren decided to find out. He recorded a choir within a non-echoing chamber. Next, he fed that audio into a computer simulation that he built based on the dimensions and materials of the church. The muddled reverberations matched actual acoustic measurements taken within the empty church, demonstrating that the simulation was accurate. Finally, Boren recreated what that music sounded like when the church was filled with sound-absorbing tapestries and people. The new simulation reduced reverberations from 7 seconds long to 3.5, making the music much clearer. And so Boren settled the argument, although to some historians, he was preaching to the choir.